Welcome back to Philippines Uncut. I'm your host, Buddy Cunanan, and tonight's show is about human rights and the Sabah issue. And joining us still is Ray Paulo Santiago. He's the Executive Director of the Ateneo Human Rights Center. Attorney Santiago, welcome to our second segment. I apologize for cutting you off earlier. We had to pause for a break, but it's good because the viewers had a chance to see a rough timeline of the Sabah issue, of the historical facts of what transpired that led to Sabah being ceded basically or being turned over, I'd like to say, to Malaysia by the British authorities. Now, so as we see, in 1658, the Sultan of Brunei gave it to the Sultan of Sulu. In 1878, the Sultan of Sulu then leased it to the North Borneo Company, which then, when it was dissolved in 1947, gave it to the British government, transferred the lease of that area to the British government, and then in 1963, the British government then transferred it to the Federation of Malaysia, which they just formed that year. So, at least now our viewers have an idea of how this whole thing transpired. Now, going back to your statement, the palace's reaction was this. They said that the Ateneo Human Rights Center's stilted knowledge of the Sabah standoff should give pause to their pontification, said no less by presidential spokesman Edwin Lacierda. What is your reaction to Mr. Lacierda's comment about your supposed pontification and stilted knowledge? Sorry, put you on the spot.
No. I wouldn't want to debate on. I wouldn't want to debate on many semantics and the language used. I mean that's for us. It's beside the point. What we're concerned actually are the implications of what happens. We can debate on the claim on Sabah all night long. It has not been resolved for decades already. And it's not simply about the claim to Sabah. It's for us, when we came up with this statement, it's a given that we have a claim. Okay, I don't know what happened to that claim. It may be in the back burner. It may be in the freezer.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if we still take this up. I mean, if you're in elementary or grade school, if they still teach that Sabah is part of the Philippines. But the fact is, there is that claim.
Yes.
And I mentioned earlier that there were 3 letters sent by the Kirams to the president early into his presidency. Okay. Now, why is that important? I think that fact of that claim and the willingness of at least this part of the heirs of the Sultanate. I'm saying part of the heirs because
there are many,
there are many
heirs,
there are many
claimants.
Many heirs. Yes, there are many claimants, and I'm not an authority to say who's claiming, who's the real claimant.
Yes.
But the fact is that there are claimants, and we just finished part 1 of the peace process. And historically, we know that, the very elusive peace in Mindanao, we've always heard of that. And just a few months back, we woke up feeling that, I think finally, peace might actually be given a chance in Mindanao.
With the MILF, the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. Okay.
Yes, and I mean, if we're talking about a comprehensive peace,
it's got to be inclusive.
It has to be inclusive. It has to be credible. It has to be with legitimacy. And if this is actually part of that part of Mindanao where they say that, but don't forget Sabah is part of Muslim Mindanao.
Yes, there are historical claims, backed up by documents, by documents.
And if we're talking about peace, why would you want to exclude this at the moment if it will if it might create another group that will create chaos or destroy the peace that we are now building,
which we're seeing now. Now, let's go back to the 3 letters. Okay, tell us about the significance of those 3 letters. So the Kiram clan or family sent 3 letters to the president, informing the president basically of this claim of theirs, and seeking the help of the administration. What happened then?
I'm not able to read the letters. From what I heard from the news, from what I heard from the news is that they are telling the president not to exclude at least the Sabah talks in the peace process. Okay, at least that's what is being claimed. It is not being denied by Malacanang. Okay, for me, the relevance of that is, at least at that early part, there was openness to dialogue.
To do things legally, to do things properly.
So, for me, what happened is, this is an act of desperation for the Royal Sultanate Army. Okay? Again, we are not condoning what they did, but it has already happened. So, the claim for them and for the Filipino people, if we're really claiming Sabah, it's a just claim.
Yes.
But the means is not correct.
Yes, and you talk about desperation. Sultan Kiram said, he sent the letters, and these went unanswered. There was no reply, and furthermore, in the talks with the MILF that culminated in the initial peace agreement last October, they were excluded, from the discussions, from the talks. So you're saying that all these two factors combined may have pushed them to this act of desperation, being sidelined with the talks with the MILF, their letters going unanswered, and now this action in the southern Philippines, in North Borneo.
Yes, that's why in our statement, if you
which is very good, by the way. It's very diplomatic, very tactful, very courteous. It was not emotional at all. It was very on the level. So very good statements.
We actually thought that it's very constructive as well.
Absolutely, no, absolutely. I was going to say very constructive.
No, but again, the reason why we came up with the statement, when we were listening to the message of the president, it was, with all honesty, we found it good up to a certain point. The gesture of the Philippine government was that we sent a humanitarian ship. We're talking of peace. We wanted maybe to resolve this in an amicable way. But again, also in the same breath that this was being said, suddenly it shifted to investigation is now being made as to your possible violations of Philippine law. So,
in fact, saying that charges could be filed against them.
Yes. So there was a threat in that same message. And again, not to condone any act of violence, okay? But we all know that, the MNLF, the MILF, they caused a lot of violence as well, okay? But why are we having peace talks with them? Because we know that there is also a valid claim to what they want, okay? We know which claim is actually relevant and credible. We know which is really just to create chaos. We can see through that with the different groups that are also in Mindanao. But here, when we talk about the Sabah issue, they're not actually creating chaos in the Philippines. It's a diplomatic gaffe because they went to Sabah, although we claim that it is part of the Philippines, Malaysia at the moment has jurisdiction over it.
Yes.
Okay? So, the claim is there.
Now, let's talk about that, okay? The Sultanate is receiving 5,000 ringgit a year, or 5,300 ringgit a year from the Malaysian government. Legally speaking, what does this mean when someone is receiving rent for something? What does this mean?
There's a provision in our rules of court here in the Philippines that it's a conclusive presumption that the lessor could not deny the lessor-lessee relationship with the lessee. So when we say that, when you are renting a property
and you're paying
and you
rent,
are paying, or in this case the lessee is receiving payment, the lessor could not say later on, the one renting could not say that, oh, actually we're the owners.
You can't, right?
You can't,
sense.
because that is the essence of paying rent.
Paying rent,
you recognize that it's not ours. Otherwise, why would you pay rent?
Yes.
So that's how we see it.
Yes.
There is, and I guess that's what also the Kirams were saying when they reacted with, Mr. President, what more do you want us to show? Because we are receiving, they are receiving lease payments for Sabah.
Yes. Is the Sultanate's claim on Sabah lawful?
If it's based on historical title. Again, I'm no authority to go into all the documents. Let's just put it this way. Okay? Based on what we all are able to read, that it was given by the Sultanate of Brunei to the Sultanate of Sulu in North Borneo, and then there was a lease agreement with North Borneo company.
Yeah.
And I'll just fast forward.
Sure.
Fast forward to a point where the Philippines actually has a claim that Sabah is part of the Philippines. Then, that in itself recognizes that the Sultanate of Sulu actually owns Sabah. Otherwise, we wouldn't be claiming it for ourselves.
What about that statement of President Aquino when he said it's a hopeless cause? Now, this has really stirred a lot of controversy because some people say that in saying that, he actually, anything that comes out of the president's mouth is policy. He's not a senator, he's not the vice president, he's the president. So any word that comes out is official's policy. And a lot of people said that since he said it's a hopeless cause, it's a de facto, surrendering of our claim to Sabah. What do you have to say about that?
If you listen again to the statement of the president, it was really unclear what was the hopeless cause. Is it the claim to Sabah? Or is it that going there by the Royal Sultanate Army and camping out there and demanding that Sabah be given to them?
So it was a gray area.
It's a gray area, and I'm not going to defend anyone. I'm just saying that by the use of these words, you're correct, buddy. When you use words and you are the chief executive of a state, what you say becomes the marching orders.
Yes.
And when you say hopeless cause, without really clarifying it, for many, and even for those who are supporters of that Royal Sultanate Army in Sabah, when they hear hopeless cause,
absolutely,
it might be misconstrued as the whole Sabah claim in itself. And it doesn't help that right after that statement, it's also not clear what the Philippine position really is on Sabah.
Yes, I had a feeling that the whole DFA was kind of marginalized in this thing. We hardly heard from, usually when there's a foreign affairs brouhaha, immediately, the Secretary of Foreign Affairs comes in, makes a statement, or maybe one of his USECs, but you hardly, it seemed in the early days of this whole thing that the DFA was kind of marginalized or sidelined in this issue. They came in later. They
came in later. Yes.
Initially nothing. Huh?
This is really a diplomatic gaffe. And I know that DFA has been involved from day one.
Absolutely.
In fact, they see it as a very important cause. But again, I would have to agree with you that in this case, the DFA is actually trying to balance being diplomatic and at the same time not going against what probably its principal is actually saying.
Absolutely.
Because the foreign policy is really set by the president.
Absolutely. Attorney Santiago, how could this have been handled better from the human rights perspective? I mean, okay, number one, let me go back, let me ask you another question. What human rights on the part of the Sultan of Sulu should be respected here, or his family?
I would not go actually into or just pinpoint the human rights of the Sultan of Sulu and his family. For me, when this standoff happened and no violence was still happening at the time, the main priority is to safeguard the right to life of not only the Royal Sultanate Army that is there, but also the people living in Lahad-Datu.
Yeah.
When violence occurs, of course, the number one casualty there would be the right to life, okay? The right to property of those who are there. And there would be internal displacement that would happen to those people living within the vicinity. So you might have, you have already heard, of course, that they had to cordon off that area, so it means they had to evacuate people from that area. So the human rights that are affected are both those from the Royal Sultanate of Sulu and those living there. Because when the army, Royal Sultanate Army went there, they actually put danger as well to other people.
But Attorney Santiago, let's say, okay, the Sultan of Sulu is a citizen of the Republic of the Philippines, and he has a claim. He has a claim, he has a historical claim, his family are, and he are claiming, Sabah. I mean, don't they have, isn't this a right of theirs also to have this claim, properly addressed by the government in a proper venue, or probably be given due attention to?
Yes, I agree. I mean, yes, I agree. I'm going just to the
Sure.
to the means of what they did.
Okay.
So, for me, there is a very volatile situation there in Lahad-Datu, and if you're going to address, if I'm the president of the Republic of the Philippines, and again in my call for peace dialogue, I would want them to come home and at least let's sit down. I assure you that let's look at the claim and let's discuss. I mean, there are many reasons why the Philippines is putting the Sabah issue in the back burner. We mere mortals might not understand.
There are bigger forces at play.
Yes, but I mean, it has to be understood by these families now who feel that they are being marginalized over a piece of property, and not just property. It's a cultural heritage for them. It's part of their
homeland.
That's part of their lineage. That this is ours.
Yes.
So, I now come to the family that yes, they have a right to at least know from the government that if they have a valid claim over Sabah, how can the government help them? Because ultimately, Sulu, the Sultanate of Sulu, is not a state. Recovery of Sabah will be a recovery of Philippine territory.
It will be a state-to-state affair.
Yes,
if ever,
yes.
if
And
ever this
it's for the whole Filipino people.
Yes, I mean, this thing could have been resolved so much easy or so much faster and definitely less messy had the president perhaps called the Sultan of Sulu and say and tell him, assure him that the government will address this and come home peacefully and leave Sabah, and we will give the assurances the Philippine government will address these claims and look into every possible legal recourse, right? I mean, that could have been a way to end this thing at the onset.
Probably, but also my training as a lawyer would also say that you may probably be right, but that may also be speculative.
Yes.
But I mean, in these kinds of situations, they might call us armchair generals because we're viewing it from the comforts of our chairs. But seriously speaking, that might have probably been the case. But if it is otherwise, then we would also know the level of sincerity of the parties. We would now see whether is this being done really for the claim's sake of Sabah? Is this being done for other political motives? I mean, we could really look at that scenario objectively then. Because then the government could actually say, we treated it more with a political solution. When I say political solution, because legally, of course, the Royal Sultanate Army definitely has violated numerous laws by going to Lahad-Datu. But like in any political, in a peace process, you try to disregard that first, see later how we can amicably talk for a political solution, without regard, of course, to some legal liabilities. You talk about legal liabilities, you just don't sweep them off the rug. But you put them for later because you want a political solution first.
Very well said. Now, as I mentioned in my opening spiel, we're all waiting in bated anticipation what's going to happen next. And definitely you and I will be talking about this as this thing unfolds over the next couple of days. Attorney Santiago, do you have some words to say to our audience before we go?
I would like to say that, human rights is a very human rights has to be enjoyed by everyone, and human rights can only be guaranteed. Full enjoyment of human rights can only be guaranteed by the government. Now, in terms of in conflict situation, not only should we talk about human rights, but we should also talk about the rights of those who are in conflict. So there are news, for example, that combatants, in this case, if those involved in the armed conflict, they should also be treated humanely in order for to recognize that their cause is not really to create pure chaos, but they're fighting because they have a cause to defend. So I hope that there's a lot to talk about on human rights. There's a lot to talk about regarding international humanitarian law. I just do hope that there would be more areas, programs, or venues where we could fully discuss how we could also help our government promote and protect our human rights.
Very well said. Attorney Santiago, thank you very much. More power to you.
Thank you very much,
and to
buddy.
the AHRC.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So guys, I hope you learned a lot about the Sabah issue today. Join us next week here on the show where we talk about what matters to you, because you guys matter the most. I'll see you next week. Gave it to the Sultan of Sulu. In 1878, the Sultan of Sulu then leased it to the North Borneo Company, which then, when it was dissolved in 1947, gave it to the British government, transferred the lease of that area to the British government, and then in 1963, the British government then transferred it to the Federation of Malaysia, which they just formed that year. So, you know, at least now our viewers have an idea of how this whole thing transpired. Now, going back to your statement, the palace's reaction was this. They said that the Ateneo Human Rights Center's stilted knowledge of the Sabah standoff should give pause to their pontification, said no less by presidential spokesman Edwin Lacierda. What is your reaction to Mr. Lacierda's comment about your supposed... Welcome back to Philippines Uncut. I'm your host, Buddy Cunanan, and tonight's show is about human rights and the Sabah issue. And joining us still is Ray Paulo Santiago. He's the Executive Director of the Ateneo Human Rights Center. Attorney Santiago, welcome to our second segment. I apologize for cutting you off earlier. We had to pause for a break, but it's good because the viewers had a chance to see a rough timeline of the Sabah issue, of the historical facts of what transpired that led to Sabah being ceded basically or being turned over, I'd like to say, to Malaysia by the British authorities. So as we see, in 1658, the Sultan of